Chapter 3, Section 3, Cell Membrane. Key concept. The cell membrane is a barrier that separates a cell from the external environment. Main ideas. Cell membranes are composed of two phospholipid layers, and chemical signals are transmitted across the cell membrane. First main idea. Cell membranes are composed of two phospholipid layers. The cell membrane, or the plasma membrane, forms a boundary between a cell and the outside environment, and controls the passage of materials into and out of the cell. The cell membrane consists of a double layer of phospholipids interspersed with a variety of other molecules. A phospholipid is a molecule composed of three basic parts: a charged phosphate group, a glycerol, and two fatty acid chains. Together, the glycerol and the phosphate group form the head of a phospholipid. The fatty acids form the tail. Because the head bears a charge, it is polar. Recall that water molecules are also polar. Therefore, the polar head of the phospholipid forms hydrogen bonds with water molecules. In contrast, the fatty acid tails are nonpolar and cannot form hydrogen bonds with water. As a result, the nonpolar tails are attracted to each other and repel water. Because the membrane touches the cytoplasm inside the cell and the watery fluid outside the cell, the properties of polar heads and nonpolar tails cause the phospholipids to arrange themselves in layers, like a sandwich. The polar heads are like the bread. They form the outer surfaces of the membrane, where they interact with the watery environment both outside and inside a cell. The nonpolar tails are like the filling. They are sandwiched between the layers of polar heads, where they are protected from the watery environment. Figure 3.1, which is on the screen here, shows other molecules embedded within the phospholipid layers. They give the membrane properties and characteristics it would not otherwise have. These molecules serve diverse functions. Here are a few examples. Cholesterol molecules strengthen the cell membrane. Some proteins extend through one or both phospholipid layers and help materials cross the membrane, and other proteins are key components of the cytoskeleton. Different cell types have different membrane properties. And lastly, carbohydrates attached to membrane proteins serve as identification tags, enabling cells to distinguish one type of cell from another. Scientists have developed the fluid mosaic model, which describes the arrangement of the molecules that make up the cell membrane. This model of cell membrane structure takes its name from two characteristics. First, the cell membrane is flexible, not rigid. The phospholipids in each layer can move from side to side and slide past each other. As a result, the membrane behaves like a fluid, similar to a film of oil on the surface of water. However, proteins embedded in the structure do not flip vertically. If one part of a protein is outside the membrane, it will stay outside the membrane. And second, the variety of molecules studding the membrane is similar to the arrangement of colorful tiles with different textures and patterns that make up a mosaic. The cell membrane has the property of selective permeability, which means it allows some, but not all, materials to cross. Selective permeability is illustrated on the screen here. The terms semi-permeable and selectively permeable also refer to this property. As an example, outdoor clothing is often made of semi-permeable fabric. The material is waterproof, yet breathable. Molecules of water vapor from sweat are small enough to exit the fabric, but water droplets are too large to enter. Selective permeability enables a cell to maintain homeostasis in spite of unpredictable, changing conditions outside the cell. Because a cell needs to maintain certain conditions to carry out its functions, it must control the import and export of certain molecules and ions. Thus, even if ion concentrations change drastically outside the cell, these ions won't necessarily interfere with vital chemical reactions inside a cell. Molecules cross the membrane in several ways. Some of these methods require the cell to expend energy, others do not. How a particular molecule crosses the membrane depends on the molecule's size, polarity, and concentration inside versus outside the cell. In general, small, nonpolar molecules easily pass through the cell membrane. Small polar molecules are transported via proteins, and large molecules are moved in vesicles. Second main idea: chemical signals are transmitted across the cell membrane. Recall that cell membranes may secrete molecules and may contain identifying molecules, such as carbohydrates. All these molecules can act as signals to communicate with other cells. But how are these signals recognized? A receptor is a protein that detects a signal molecule and performs an action in response. It recognizes and binds to only certain molecules, ensuring that the right cells get the right signal at the right time. The molecule a receptor binds to is called a ligand. When a receptor and a ligand bind, they change shape. This change is critical because it affects how a receptor interacts with other molecules. Two major types of receptors are present in your cells. A molecule may cross the cell membrane and bind to an intercellular receptor, as is shown on the screen here. The word intracellular means within or inside a cell. Molecules that cross the membrane are generally nonpolar and may be relatively small. Many hormones fit within this category. For example, aldosterone can cross most cell membranes. However, it produces an effect only in cells that have the right type of receptor, such as kidney cells. When aldosterone enters a kidney cell, it binds to an intracellular receptor. The receptor-ligand complex enters the nucleus, interacts with the DNA, and turns on certain genes. As a result, specific proteins are made that help the kidneys absorb sodium ions and retain water, both of which are important for maintaining normal blood pressure. A molecule that cannot cross the membrane may bind to a receptor in the cell membrane, like is shown on the screen here. The receptor then sends the message to the cell interior. Although the receptor binds to the signal molecule outside the cell, the entire receptor changes shape, even the part inside the cell. As a result, it causes the molecules inside the cell to respond. These molecules, in turn, start a complicated chain of events inside the cell that tells the cell what to do. For instance, Band 3 protein is a membrane receptor in red blood cells. When activated, it triggers processes that carry carbon dioxide from body tissues to the lungs. This has been Chapter 3, Section 3, Cell Membrane. Key concept: the cell membrane is a barrier that separates a cell from the external environment. Main ideas: cell membranes are composed of two phospholipid layers, and chemical signals are transmitted across the cell membrane.